The road into Normandy smelled of diesel and smoke, and everywhere the ground trembled as if a giant had a fever dream. On one side of that fever, the United States poured men and machines forward like an inexorable tide. And on the other, the German armored formations held like islands of iron and conviction, each side obeying a doctrine as much as an order. From the first meeting of treads on the bocage, a single question threaded every collision. Which approach to armored war would win? Speed and sustainment, or concentrated armored violence? Early American tank doctrine read like an industrial prayer. Keep moving, keep communicating, keep the guns firing. Crew training emphasized radio use, mutual support with infantry and artillery, and the near-sacred habit of maintenance. A Sherman tank stank of gasoline and oil, but it rolled day after day because supply lines fed it and shop crews tended it. Radios in almost every vehicle turned platoons into a nervous system. Maps were redrawn in real time over crackling channels. Orders passed in short human voices. Men felt that voice as much as they heard it. Left flank, fall back, 6 shots left. And that voice saved lives more often than steel. The German world, by contrast, had been shaped by a different kind of faith. German doctrine prized the decisive strike, the shock delivered at the point of contact by an armored fist that could shatter morale. Tanks like the Panther and the Tiger I were engineered as answers to a problem they sometimes created: how to win a duel at long range. Their guns were longer, their armor thicker, and their optics sharp as blades. When a Tiger I opened its 88mm gun, the concussion was a statement. Crews watched tracer slices tear into distance and waited for the last twitch of an enemy silhouette. The doctrine demanded local initiative. Platoon commanders were expected to find the shot and take it. The men inside those beasts lived with a constant, brittle pride and the terror of breakdown. Pressure mounted along the hedgerows because these two doctrines were not abstractions. They were mechanics, logistics, temperaments. The Americans had factories humming with common parts and assembly line thinking. The Sherman was deliberately not the heaviest monster on the field. It was instead a machine that could be rebuilt in a village square, cannibalized for parts, and sent back within days. There was a hidden advantage in the Sherman's aviation-derived radial engine that some crews loved. Any mechanic who knew aircraft engines could coax the tank back to life from salvage. It felt less glamorous than a heavy tank that could win a single duel, but it promised dozens of returns to the fight. The Germans suffered their own hidden costs. The Panther's interleaved road wheels were engineering genius for cross-country traction, but in winter they trapped mud and ice, jamming ankles of the suspension into a ruin. The Tiger I's intricate final drives were more prone to failure than its gun was to inflict damage. When a German commander ordered an advance, he rarely considered that his tanks might stop with smoke curling from under the armor. Not because of enemy fire, but because an overtaxed gearbox had burned through parts that could not be replaced at the front. The psychology of those moments was brutal. Crews who had confidence in their tank's killing power discovered they were as fragile as any human pride. The turning point came, quietly, in the gap between doctrine and reality. Midway through the Normandy campaign, the aha moment arrived not with trumpet fanfare, but as a revelation on a map. Superior gun power meant little if the gun could not be put where it needed to be at the right moment. German heavy tanks, arrayed in strong points and long-range firing positions, melted when the American tide found a way to bypass them. The decisive weapon became not the 88mm tube, but the logistics train that moved fuel, ammunition, and spare parts forward. Mobility, when sustained by supply, turned static superiority into obsolescence. There were smaller human revelations that no textbook liked to show. Tankers learned to carry spare track links on the glacis as improvised armor because they could not count on replacements in time. Radio operators learned to speak in clipped cadences because a single long transmission could be lost among the static of exploding shells. American crews traded stories at night about how a Sherman had shrugged off a hit that would have killed a helpless panther immobilized by a blown final drive. German crews, when they could speak candidly, confessed the dread that came before dawn when they would discover which road would have fuel and which would have a minefield, knowing that their doctrine had little patience for being stranded. Tension boiled into a single violent crescendo in the cauldron that followed Operation Cobra and the collapse toward the Falaise Pocket. American doctrine, mobility married to logistics and communications, suddenly had something more: numbers and the ability to sustain them. Sherman units swarmed through gaps, not to duel with tigers, but to encircle and cut off. Once a German heavy tank found itself surrounded, its superior gun could not cut an exit that logistics had already sealed. A Tiger one that might have destroyed half a company from a long ridge found itself hemmed in by bulldozers clearing roads, engineers laying bridges, fuel trucks arriving with the sun. Men on foot and steel with radios converged. The heavy tank's duel was now a parable of isolation. The climax is not a single shell leaving a muzzle so much as a sequence of human reckonings. In the choking smoke and the cliffs of abandoned kit, German crews scrambled for fuel coupons, for orders that arrived too late, for tracks to tow. American mechanics worked under shell bursts, hands black with grease, cursing or laughing as they coaxed a Sherman back onto the road. One soldier later wrote about the sound of a Sherman's return to life. The crank, the cough, the throttle, and how it felt like a heartbeat coming back in a man thought gone. That heartbeat kept the advance alive. It turned the battlefield into a rolling mosaic, where the side that could keep its machines moving dominated the one that could not. When the mud dried and the fields gave up their dead, the lesson had a harsh human edge. Heavy firepower could win engagements, but only if you could deliver and sustain that fire where and when it mattered. The United States learned that strategy could be industrialized. Radios in every vehicle, interchangeable parts, constant replacement of lost tanks, and a doctrine that accepted punishment in order to outpace the enemy. The Germans learned that engineering marvels were vulnerable to the arithmetic of attrition. Their tanks were magnificent instruments, but magnificence does not order spare parts to the front. What remained after the smoke and the towing of wrecks were not just broken machines, but men who understood that doctrine had cost them more than victories. For American crews, the cost of keep them running was exhaustion and an endless chain of small, draining choices. For German crews, the cost was the slow erosion of the conditions that had made their doctrine viable in the first place. In the fields where tanks once fought, farmers still find fragments of radio sets and spent shells, small proofs that industrial scale and the daily work of repair decided battles as surely as any gun. The final takeaway was as practical as it was human. War is an engine that runs on men, material, and the habits that bind them. Who could aim best mattered less than who could move fastest, feed their machines, and talk to each other while the world burned. That realization reshaped post-war thinking on armor and left a simpler, grimmer memory in the men who lived it. Men who could still hear, in memory, the sound of a tank engine that would, against all odds, start again.